Welcome to the premiere episode of Lake Avalon Entertainment's podcast, Nightshade. This podcast is an anthology of original short stories which delve into the realms of science fiction, suspense, fantasy, psychological thrillers, and more. These stories are not necessarily connected, so start with any episode that captures your imagination. Make sure you check out lakeavalonentertainment.com for show notes, extras, information about our cast and crew, and our upcoming projects. Follow us on social media to stay up to date with the latest happenings at Lake Avalon Entertainment. Now, we invite you to take a journey with us. A journey to a place where the lines between reality and the bizarre run together, and open a gateway to a world that looks and seems a lot like ours, only not as bright under the midday sun, and much more uncertain where the moon looms hazily above. Watch your step. Proceed with caution. Welcome to Nightshade. The depth of the bond between a mother and her children is tested by a thirst for truth. Is forever too much to ask? Presenting Nightshade, Episode 1, Mama's Little Dolly.
Mama always wanted a little girl she could dress up in frilly things, but she got my brother Brian instead. That is, until I came some years later. We've been in the duplex as long as I can remember, and I don't recall anybody ever living next door to us. In fact, after Brian left, it was just me and Mama, and of course, the dolls. Mama sure loved her dolls. That's how she made her living, you know. It was her craft, and also how and why I was christened with the name Dolly. I guess you could say that I have always been my mama's pride and joy, and I have always been more than happy to oblige the others by playing my role in the family as perfectly as I know how. It sure has gotten lonely over the years, however. I used to take comfort in having Brian round, especially when Mama got in one of her tirades. I also looked forward to when we would have company, though Mama had few acquaintances and nearly no gentlemen callers. What's more, I seldom met one of her clients, and since I schooled at home, I rarely saw the outside of our cozy little house for two. I'm not sure how old I am. Mama didn't believe in holidays, so I never had a birthday. Neither did Brian when he was here. Perhaps that's why he was so resentful. They used to argue something awful, too. And Lord have mercy, did Mama get sore about it. See, Brian was a very sick boy growing up, and Mama just had the hardest time keeping him from doing things that might bring harm upon him. Things like going to regular school and playing with the other kids. It sure was quiet after he left, that's for certain. I'm a young lady now, I think. I'm definitely not a little girl anymore, albeit Mama never stopped treating me like one. I don't remember our daddy. He and Mama split up before I was born, from what I come to understand. Shortly thereafter, she had her accident, and thereby lost the right side of her face. For those who didn't know Mama, they would have never known on account of the fact that she kept it covered with her hair. Even I was seldom to see it. See, as soon as she realized it was exposed, she hurried to swoop her graying strands in front of it. It's difficult to put into words, really. I guess it kind of looked like thawing steak bits left out too long on the windowsill during a hot summer day. But the other side of her face bore the sweetness of an aging beauty, ripening rapidly before its time. There was a sorrow about her that made me want to stay, made me want to take care of her. And she had been ever sad leading up to the days before Brian came back for a surprise visit. It was just after Halloween, and we were visited by an early frost. Momma lost her aloe plants on account of it, and therefore was in an especially sour mood. She coveted their healing properties and dubbed them her magic greens. Unfortunately, the frostbite didn't stop at the plants. The sudden shift in temperature proved enough to snap one or more of the pipes in the duplex as well. So not only did we have little to no water pressure for hygienic purposes or the washing of our garments, the walls had begun to seep moisture, and in doing so, stained Momma's pretty scenic decor. That to which she painted when Daddy and her were just newlyweds. They served as a testimony that she once saw the world much differently than she had in recent years. A series of murals in various rooms, murals of rustic scenes and simpler times. Alas, the two unexpected losses were enough to put Momma in one of her incensed spells. In fact, I hadn't seen her this cross since Brian left home. And when Momma was like that, it meant I had to be especially Bobby-like, as to avoid being put in the box. A punishment Momma contrived when I was very young, kind of like time out or solitary confinement. That is, she would make me get into a giant box with a hole cut in the front of it, then wrap the front with cellophane and make me strike a pose of a pretty little girl who, according to her, was as sinless as an angel's bottom. I'd have to maintain that pose until Momma said. Otherwise, she'd fill 2 pots with water, bring them to a boil, and dunk my hands in them. The more I screamed, the longer she would hold them there. Brian used to try and stop her, but it would only cause her to turn her aggression toward him, and his punishments were even worse than mine. She tried to get Brian to come and take a look at the pipes for a week or 2, until she finally gave up, accepting that he was no longer her live-in maintenance man. She turned to the phone book and dialed the first plumber she came across. Guy Monroe from 3 Guys and a Tool Belt. She did no background checks on him. He had the biggest and flashiest ad, and that was good enough for her. He showed up just after noon, a couple of days later, indicating that he had an unexpected family thing to deal with. Momma told him to join the club and then directed him to the problem in our tiny duplex. She didn't introduce me, but she kept me near her side the entire time. He unhooked a big old wrench from his side and started tapping on the walls. Momma giggled awkwardly and told him it was the first time we ever had a professional in the home.
Yeah, it looks it,
he said.
Listen, lady, this is gonna be a pretty big job. Hope you got homeowners.
Actually.
She snickered, sipping from her muddied coffee cup.
I wanted to talk to you about that. I may have been forced to let that lapse on account of the pressures of being a single mom and all.
She shuffled toward him, exploiting a gait I had never seen Momma use before. She unfastened the first few buttons of her flannel pajama top.
But, I'm sure we can work something out.
The plumber looked away, then cleared his throat, saying,
Lady, please don't do that. I'm not in the business of doing or accepting favors, all right? However, since I'm already here, I can check it out for you and give you a free estimate. That's the best I can do. Whether you can afford the repairs is on you. Now, I notice this is a duplex. Do you, have access to the adjacent home?
Momma said nothing at first, just gritted her teeth and gave the man the most wicked scowl, just like she always did to us when we said or did something out of line. Brian and I, that is. But it didn't faze the plumber. He just shrugged, clipped his wrench back in place, and made his way for the door.
It's,
Momma cried out.
Vacant. Nobody's lived there for over a decade. I mostly use it for storage.
Well,
the plumber grumbled.
I'd be willing to bet that that's where the problem originates. I can confirm it for you in 2 seconds flat.
Momma nodded hesitantly, then grabbed her keys and led the man out of sight. They were gone for about 10 minutes. I could hear them shuffling around on the other side of the walls. Couple of knocks, couple of thumps, couple of bangs. Then a bit of laughter, but it didn't last long. What followed had the timbre of an argument. Lots of yelling, followed by screaming. I could only imagine what over. I wanted to go and help. I've always preferred peace over fighting, but I also knew that Momma would scold me but good if I interfered or acted out of role. It was my job to be seen and not heard. Momma's pretty little girl. So I waited in nervous anticipation. And waited, and waited. Too much time had gone by. Something was wrong. Then, finally, Momma stepped through the door. However, she was the only one to return. Trembling and covered in blood, she looked at me and began to laugh. Only, there were tears that rolled off each and every chortle and snort.
I gotta call your brother again, she said. He has to pick up this time. He'll know what to do. He has to. I won't be able to clean this one up for myself.
At last she got through. Somebody was definitely on the other end. It sounded as though it was Brian, but I couldn't tell for sure. The conversation was short and tense and one-sided, but when it was finished, Momma hung up the phone and offered up a grin, a genuinely happy one. Then she went outside for a while. She let me look out the window like she always did when she left for a spell. It was dark out, but I knew she was the one who got in the plumber's truck and drove it away. I fell asleep, waiting for her to come back again. The whole thing seemed like a bad dream. And when I awoke, I realized that I had been moved, relocated to my bed and neatly tucked in. Momma was on the couch in the living room. She had once again fallen asleep knitting, a habit that had become routine in recent weeks. In fact, if I didn't know better, I would have thought she was expecting another child. I called out for her to let me up. I hated being tucked into bed by Momma. She pulled up the blanket so tight that the procedure could literally be used in prisons for unruly inmates. Momma's eyes eased open with the urgency of a snail taking flight from a weed whip. And once they were finally focused, she seemed to have little to no concern about my current predicament. She just sat there staring off into nothingness. Finally, she glanced my way and said,
"Well, little girl, don't ask how your mother did it, that your brother is on his way. We're gonna have ourselves a family reunion in less than...
She looked up at the clock and cursed it. But since I'm a lady, I'll refrain from repeating exactly what she said. Suffice it to say, she was not happy with what the clock told her.
Your brother's gonna be here any minute now. I have to get ready.
She left the front room and also me trapped beneath the blankets. I could hear the thumping on the walls and knew it meant Momma was running the water. The last couple of days she'd been cleaning herself up with the hose outside. It made a hail of a racket. Shortly thereafter, I heard a faint knock at the door. Then, someone stepped inside. It didn't startle me, though. I knew who it was. Brian always entered that way. It was his way of keeping his distance from the rest of the family. He lightly stepped through the front room and then made his way toward me. He said nothing, just quietly helped me from underneath the covers and carried me over to the couch. The house was eerily silent. The both of us sat still and quiet, just like we did when we were kids. Then, after some time, he glanced over his shoulder, then back at me, muttering,
Same old Momma, huh?
And what's that supposed to mean?
Both of us nearly jumped out of our seats. It was Momma, of course. She had a way of sneaking up on you. It was as though she knew exactly where to be so she could catch you doing or saying something that might offend her in some way.
Nothing, Mother.
Brian popped off defensively.
You're the one who all but begged me to come out here, remember? I don't have to stay.
He got up and stepped toward the door. Mama's disposition immediately shifted, and she was all smiles.
There's no reason to start things off on shaky ground. Why don't you sit yourself down and let Momma put on a pot of coffee for everyone?
Brian turned to her annoyed.
Just tell me what you want me to do. I gotta get back by 6. Robin and I have plans tonight.
Deal with her?
Momma spouted.
No thanks to you.
Robin was Brian's childhood sweetheart, the girl down the street. They used to sit out front on the porch because Momma wouldn't let neighborhood kids come inside. Most of the time, they just held hands and talked. Though one particular evening, they were out there on the bench swing, and they were getting real close. Brian had his arm around her, and they began to kiss. Well, between the swaying and the kissing and the caressing, Momma must have peeked out and found offense to him carrying on like that. She barged out, and with a slam of the door, told the little tramp to go corrupt some other woman's son. Robin ran away, but evidently not for good, and not too far. Brian never did forgive Momma for that. By and large, it was what prompted him to take flight under the moonlit sky one sticky summer night.
Unlike you, Momma,
Brian hissed.
some of us can hang on to those we love.
Momma slapped him across the face, but Brian didn't flinch.
You can't hurt me anymore, Momma. I'm not afraid of you anymore.
Momma started crying and came over to me for comfort. She held me tight and rocked us both on the couch vigorously.
Oh, just tell me what you want me to do for you, so I can do it and get back home to my wife.
But you're home, son.
Momma sobbed.
Don't you see that?
Brian shook his head in disgust and then stormed toward the door. Momma ran over and grabbed hold of him. He tried to pull away, but she wouldn't let go. Wrapping her arms around him like a boa constrictor, she whispered something in his ear that I couldn't make out. And then he freed himself of her grasp and left outside. Momma stood in the doorway. Her back was to me, and though she was utterly silent and motionless, I knew she was weeping. An hour or so went by, and then she sat back down beside me and started knitting again. That's when Brian returned. But this time, he was different from before. This time, he oozed from his paws the burden of rage.
You twisted witch!
Momma covered my ears, but I could still hear their muffled conversation.
Don't you talk like that in front of your sister.
She's not my sister, Mama. She's just another one of your dolls.
How dare you?
How dare me? I'm not a killer. I'm not the one who killed Father and the lady next door and her teenage daughter.
I don't know what you're talking about. Your father left when you were just a little boy.
I may have been young, Mama, but I remember it. I finally remember it all.
Momma picked me up and scurried the two of us away from my enraged brother. He rushed after us, shouting horrible things.
You were jealous because Father's affection was being given to Miss Dahlia. That was her name. You found them in bed together. But you weren't alone. I was with you. You killed them both with...
Momma shook her head in denial, and with a grrr, she pushed him back. The next thing I knew, she put me back in time out and covered her own ears. She may have tried to block him out, but I heard him loud and clear.
We were raking the leaves, and that's when you saw Dad's truck parked down the street. Curious, you went and peeked through Miss Dahlia's window. You squeezed my hand so tight I thought you were going to break it clean off. Then you fetched a shovel from the tool shed and dragged me inside Miss Dahlia's home. You hit Dad with the shovel when he was still on top of her. Then you drove the sharp end of it into his throat. Almost took his head clean off. Miss Dahlia, God, you tortured that poor woman for hours before you killed her. And as for her daughter...
He looked over to me, and then to Momma.
Is that why you killed the plumber? Because he found the skeletal remains of two people in the walls? You need help, Mother. You convinced me that I was the sick one all those years. You made me drink your awful elixirs and wouldn't let me go to school. And all along it was you. It was you. Well, no more.
He turned and stepped toward the phone. Then Momma, who had all but curled up in the corner like a frightened little girl, raised her knitting needle in front of her face and quieted her tears. Brian picked up the phone and started dialing. Quivering and with clenched teeth, Momma rushed Brian like a tribal huntress, jumped on his back, and plunged the tool with which she had made her living into her son over and over, again and again, until he at last found the strength to push her off of him. She hit the kitchen wall like a hamburger patty getting slapped by a spatula. She went limp and dropped to the floor immediately. Brian was bleeding something awful. He cried out Mama's name and staggered over to her.
Mama?
She was lifeless in his arms. It appeared she snapped her neck from the impact against the wall. Her eyes were wild and crazed. He held her for a spell and gently set her to rest on the floor. But he laid her down, and with her bed side facing up, and didn't cover it with her hair like she would have wanted. I remember wishing I wasn't stuck in time out. I would have killed him myself for such blatant disregard. He tried to make it over to the phone, but tripped and fell in front of the coffee table on which I stood in my box. He reached up toward me, his hands trembling and dripping blood. He tried to talk, but what mostly came out was the gurgling semblance of the plea.
Help me.
But I knew not to move a muscle. Mama would be back. We were family. We would always be family. Somewhere, she was watching. My brother's bloody fingers stained the cellophane on my box as he begged for his life. Mama wouldn't like that either. She always expected me to look my very best. Pretty, quiet, perfect. Her little Dolly.
Join us again for another episode of Nightshade. Episode 1, Mama's Little Dolly, features the voices of Robin Mudge as Dolly, Heidi Lynn as Momma, and Casey Krause as Brian and the Plumber. This has been a Lake Avalon production of an original story by Kurt C. Krause. Copyright 2018. Please visit lakeavalonentertainment.com for more information on our cast and crew, as well as some fun extra content. Be sure to explore all of Lake Avalon while you are there. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Nightshade on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a like, a comment, or a review to help us to reach even more podcast lovers like you. Can't find us in your favorite place for podcast? Email Robin Mudge at lakeavalonentertainment.com or interact with us on social media and let us know. For information on our upcoming projects or to know more about the fictitious world known as Lake Avalon, email Casey Krause at lakeavalonentertainment.com. That's KACEEKRAUSE at lakeavalonentertainment.com. Thank you so much for listening, and may your life be far from normal.